The Ghetto by Jack London. Is it well that while we range with signs, glorying in the time, city children soak and blacken soul and sense in city slime? Where among the gloomy allies progress halts on palsied feet, crime and hunger cast our maidens by the thousands on the street, where the master scrims his haggard seamstress of her daily bread, where a single sordid attic holds the living and the dead, where the smouldering fire of fever creeps across the rotted floor, and the crowded couch of incest in the warrens of the poor. Tennyson. At one time the nations of Europe confined the undesirable Jews in city ghettos, but today the dominant economic class, by less arbitrary but none the less rigorous methods, has confined the undesirable yet necessary workers into ghettos of remarkable meanness and vastness. East London is such a ghetto, where the rich and the powerful do not dwell and the traveller cometh not, and where 2 million workers swarm, procreate, and die. It must not be supposed that all the workers of London are crowded into the East End, but the tide is setting strongly in that direction. The poor quarters of the city proper are constantly being destroyed, and the main stream of the unhoused is toward the east. In the last 12 years, one district, London over the border, as it is called, which lies beyond Aldgate, Whitechapel, and Mile End, has increased 260,000, or over 60%. The churches in this district, by the way, can seat but one in every 37 of the added population. The city of dreadful monotony the East End is often called, and especially by well-fed optimistic sightseers who look over the surface of things and are merely shocked by the intolerable sameness and meanness of it all. If the East End is worthy of no worse title than the city of dreadful monotony, and if working people are unworthy of variety and beauty and surprise, it would not be such a bad place in which to live. But the East End does merit a worse title. It should be called the city of degradation. While it is not a city of slums, as some people imagine, it may well be said to be one gigantic slum. From the standpoint of simple decency and clean manhood and womanhood, any mean street of all its mean streets is a slum, where sights and sounds abound which neither you nor I would care to have our children see and hear, is a place where no man's children should live and see and hear. Where you and I would not care to have our wives pass their lives, is a place where no other man's wife should have to pass her life. For her, in the East End, the obscenities and brute vulgarities of life are rampant. There is no privacy. The bad corrupts the good, and all fester together. Innocent childhood is sweet and beautiful, but in East London, innocence is a fleeting thing, and you must catch them before they crawl out of the cradle, or you will find the very babies as unholy wise as you. The application of the golden rule determines that East London is an unfit place in which to live. Where you would not have your own babies live and develop and gather to itself knowledge of life and the things of life, is not a fit place for the babes of other men to live and develop and gather to themselves knowledge of life and the things of life. It is a simple thing, this golden rule, and all that is required. Political economy and the survival of the fittest can go hang if they say otherwise. What is not good enough for you is not good enough for other men, and there is no more to be said. There are 300,000 people in London, divided into families that live in one-room tenements. Far more live in 2 and 3 rooms and are as badly crowded, regardless of sex, as those that live in other rooms. The law demands 400 cubic feet of space for each person. In army barracks, each soldier is allowed 600 cubic feet. Professor Huxley, at one time himself a medical officer in East London, always held that each person should have 800 cubic feet of space and that it should be well ventilated with pure air. Yet in London there are 900,000 people living in less than 400 cubic feet prescribed by the law. Mr. Charles Booth, who engaged in a systematic work of years in charting and classifying the toiling city population, estimates that there are 1,800,000 people in London who are poor and very poor. It is of interest to mark what he terms poor. By poor he means families which have a total weekly income of from $4.50 to $5.25. The very poor fall greatly below the standard. The workers as a class are being more and more segregated by their economic masters, and this process, with its jamming and overcrowding, tends not so much toward immorality as unmorality. Here's an extract from a recent meeting of London County Council, terse and bold, but with a wealth of horror to be read between the lines. Mr. Bruce asked the chairman of a public health committee whether his attention had been called to a number of cases of serious overcrowding in the East End. In St. George's, in the East, a man and his wife and their family of 8 occupied one small room. This family consisted of 5 daughters, aged 20, 17, 84, and an infant, and 3 sons aged 15, 13, and 12. In Whitechapel, a man and his wife and their 3 daughters aged 16, 8, and 4, and 2 sons aged 10 and 12 years occupied a smaller room. In Bethnal Green, a man and his wife, 4 sons aged 23, 21, 19, and 16, and 2 daughters aged 14 and 7, were also found in one room. He asked whether it was not the duty of the various local authorities to prevent such a serious overcrowding. But with 900,000 people actually living under illegal conditions, the authorities have their hands full. When the overcrowded folk are ejected, they stray off into some other hole, and as they move their belongings by night, on hand-barrows, one hand-barrow accommodating the entire household goods and the sleeping children, it is next to impossible to keep track of them. If the Public Health Act of 1891 were suddenly and completely enforced, 900,000 people would receive notice to clear out of their houses and go onto the streets, and 500,000 rooms would have to be built before they were all legally housed again. The mean streets merely look mean from the outside, but inside the walls are to be found squalor, misery, and tragedy. While the following tragedy may be revolting to read, it must not be forgotten that the existence of it is far more revolting. In Devonshire Place, Lisson Grove, a short while back died an old woman of 75 years of age. At the inquest, the coroner's officer stated that all he found in the room was a lot of old rags covered with vermin. He had got himself smothered with the vermin. The room was in a shocking condition, and he had never been anything like it. Everything was absolutely crowded with vermin. The doctor said he found the keys lying across the fender on the back. She had one garment and her stockings on. The body was quite alive with vermin, and all the clothes in her room were absolutely grey with insects. The keys was very badly nourished and was very emaciated. She had extensive sores on her legs, and her stockings were adherent to those sores. The sores were the result of vermin. A man present at the inquest wrote, I had the evil fortune to see the body of the unfortunate woman as it lay in the mortuary, and even now the memory of that gruesome sight makes me shudder. There she lay in the mortuary shell, so starved and emaciated that she was a mere bundle of skin and bones. Her hair, which was matted with filth, was simply a nest of vermin. Over her bony chest leaped and rode hundreds, thousands, myriads of vermin. If it is not good for your mother and my mother so to die, then it is not good for this woman, whosoever's mother she might be, so to die. Bishop Wilkinson, who has lived in Zululand, recently said, no headman of an African village would allow such a promiscuous mixing of young men and women, boys and girls. He had reference to the children of the overcrowded folk who at 5 have nothing to learn and much to unlearn, which we will never unlearn. It is notorious that here in the ghetto the houses of the poor are greater profit earners than the mansions of the rich. Not only does the poor worker have to live like a beast, but he pays proportionally more for it than does the rich man for his spacious comfort. A class of house sweaters has been made possible by the competition of the poor for houses. There are more people than there is a room, and numbers are in the workhouse because they cannot find shelter elsewhere. Not only are the houses let, but they are sublet and sub-sublet down to the very rooms. A part of a room to let. This notice was posted a short while ago in a window not 5 minutes' walk from St. James's Hall. Reverend Huge Price Hughes is authority for the statement that beds are let on the free relay system, that is, 3 tenants to a bed, each occupying it 8 hours, so that it never grows cold. The floor space underneath the bed is likewise let on the free relay system. Health officers are not at all unused to finding such cases as the following. In one room having a cubic capacity of 1,000 feet, 3 adult females in the bed and 2 adult females under the bed, and in one room of 1,650 cubic feet, 1 adult male and 2 children in the bed and 2 adult females under the bed. Here's a typical example of a room on the more respectable 2-relay system. It is occupied in the daytime by a young woman employed all night in a hotel. At 7 o'clock in the evening, she vacates the room, and a bricklayer's laborer comes in. At 7 in the morning, he vacates and goes to the work, at which time she returns from hers. The Reverend W. N. Davis, rector of Spitalfields, took a census of some of the alleys in his parish. He says, in one alley there are 10 houses, 51 rooms, nearly all about 8 feet by 9 feet, and 254 people. In 6 instances only do 2 people occupy one room, and in others the number varied from 3 to 9. In another court with 6 houses and 22 rooms were 84 people. Again, 6, 7 and 9 being the number living in one room, in several instances. In one house with 8 rooms are 45 people, one room containing 9 persons, one 8, two 7, and another 6. With Ghetto, crowding is not through inclination but compulsion. Nearly 50% of the workers pay from 1/4 to 1/2 of their earnings for rent. The average rent in the larger part of the East End is from $1 to $1.50 per week for one room, while skilled mechanics earning $8.75 per week are forced to part with $3.75 of it for 2 or 3 poky little dens in which they strive desperately to obtain some semblance of home life. And rents are going up all the time. In one street in Stepney, the increase in only 2 years has been from $3.25 to $4.50.25. In another street from $2.75 to $4, and in another street from $2.75 to $3.75. While in Whitechapel, 2-room houses that recently rented for $2.50 are now costing $5.25. East, west, north, and south, the rents are going up. When land is worth from $100,000 to $150,000 an acre, someone must pay the landlord. Mr. W.C. Stedman in the House of Commons, in a speech concerning his constituency in Stepney, related the following. This morning, not 100 yards from where I am myself living, a widow stopped me. She has 6 children to support, and the rent of her house was 14 shillings per week. She gets a living by letting the house to lodgers and doing a day's washing or sharing. But a woman with tears in her eyes told me that the landlord had increased the rent from 14 shillings to 18 shillings. What could the woman do? There's no accommodation in Stepney. Every place is taken up and overcrowded. Class supremacy can rest only on class degradation, and when the workers are segregated in the ghetto, they cannot escape the consequent degradation. A short and stunned people is created, a breed strikingly differentiated from their master's breed, a pavement folk, as it were, lacking stamina and strength. The man became a caricaturist of what physical men ought to be, and the women and children are pale and anemic, with eyes ringed darkly, who stoop and slosh and are early twisted out of all shapeliness and beauty. To make matters worse, the men of a ghetto are the men who are left, a dictatorial stock left to undergo still further deterioration. For 150 years at least, they have been drained of their best. Strong men, the men of pluck, initiative, and ambition, have been faring forth to the fresher and freer portions of the globe to make new lands and nations. Those who are lacking the weak of heart and head and hand, as well as the rotten and hopeless, have remained to carry on the breed, and year by year, in turn, the best of the breed are taken from them. Wherever a man of vigour and stature manages to grow up, he is hailed forthwith into the army. A soldier, as Bernard Shaw has said, ostensibly a heroic and patriotic defender of his country, is really an unfortunate man driven by destitution to offer himself as food for powder for the sake of regular rations, shelter, and clothing. This constant selection of the best from the workers has impoverished those who are left, a sadly degraded remainder for the great part which, in the ghetto, sinks to the deepest depths. The wine of life has been drawn off to spill itself in blood and progressively over the rest of the earth. Those that remain, nevertheless, they are segregated and steeped in themselves. They become indecent and bestial. When they kill with their hands, and then stupidly surrender themselves to the executioners. There is no splendid audacity about their transgressions. They gore a maid with a dull knife, or beat his head in with the iron pot, and then sit down and wait for the police. Wife-beating is the masculine prerogative of matrimony. They wear remarkable boots of brass and iron, and when they have polished off the mother of her children with a black eye or so, they knock her down and proceed to trample her very much as a western stallion tramples a rattlesnake. A woman of the lower ghetto classes is as much the slave of a husband as is the Indian squaw, and I, for one, were I a woman and had but the 2 choices, should prefer being the squaw. The men are economically dependent on their masters, and the women are economically dependent on the men. The result is, the woman gets the beating the man should give his master, and she can do nothing. They are the kiddies, and he is the breadwinner, and she dare not send him to jail, and leave herself and children to starve. Evidence to convict can rarely be obtained when such cases come into the courts. As a rule, the trampled wife and mother is weeping and hysterically beseeching the magistrate to let her husband off for the kiddies' sakes. The wives became screaming hardians or broken-spirited, and dog-like lose what little decency and self-respect they have remained over from their maiden days, and all sink together unheeding in their degradation and dirt. Sometimes I become afraid of my own generalizations upon the mass misery of this ghetto life and feel that my impressions are exaggerated, that I am too close to the picture and lack perspective. At such moments I find it well to turn to the testimony of other men to prove to myself that I am not becoming overawed and elevated. Frederick Harrison has always struck me as being a level-headed, well-controlled man, and he says, to me at least, it would be enough to condemn modern society as hardly an advance on slavery or serfdom, if the permanent conditions of industry were to be that which we behold, that 90% of the actual producers of wealth have no home that they can call their own beyond the end of the week, have no bit of soil or so much as a room that belongs to them, have nothing of value of any kind except as much old furniture as will go into a cart, have a precarious chance of meekly wages which barely suffice to keep them in health, a household, for the most part, in places that no man thinks fit for his horse, are separated by so narrow a margin from destitution that a month of bad trade, sickness, or unexpected loss brings them face to face of hunger and pauperism. But below this normal state of the average workman in town and country, there is found the great band of destitute outcasts, the camp followers of the army of industry, at least 1/10 of the whole proletarian population, whose normal condition is one of a sickening wretchedness. If this is to be the permanent arrangement of modern society, civilization must be held to bring a curse on the great majority of mankind. 90%. The figures are appalling. Yet the revenant stop for the brook, after drawing a frightful London picture, finds himself compelled to multiply it by 500,000. Here it is. I often used to meet, when I was to create at Kensington, families drifting into London along the Hammersmith Road. One day there came along a labourer and his wife, a son and 2 daughters. The family had lived for a long time on an estate in the country, and managed with the help of the common land and the labour to get on. But the time came when the common was encouraged upon, and the labour was not needed on the estate, and they were quietly turned out of their cottage. Where shall we go? Of course to London. The work was thought to be plentiful. They had a little savings, and they thought they could get 2 decent rooms to live in. But the inexorable land question met them in London. They tried the decent courts for lodgings, and found that 2 rooms would cost 10 shillings a week. Food was at the end bad, water was bad, and in a short time the health suffered. Work was hard to get, and its wage was so low that they were soon in debt. They became more ill and more despairing with the poisonous surroundings, the darkness, and the long hours of work, and they were driven forth to seek a cheaper lodging. They found it in a court I knew well, a hotbed of crime and nameless horrors. In this they got a single room at a cruel rent, and work was more difficult for them to get now, as they came from a place of such bad repute, and they fell into the hands of those who sweat the last drop out of a man and woman and child, for wages which are the food only of despair. And the darkness and the dirt, the bad food and the sickness and the want of water was worse than before, and the crowd and the companionship of the court robbed them of the last shreds of self-respect. The drink demon seized upon them. Of course there was a public house at both ends of the court. There they fled, one and all, for shelter and warmth and society and forgetfulness. And they came out in deeper debt with inflamed senses and burning brains and an unsatisfied craving for drink, and would do anything to satiate. In a few months the father was in prison, the wife dying, the son a criminal, and the daughters on the street. Multiply this by 500,000, and you will be beneath the truth. No more dreary spectacle can be found on this earth than the whole of the awful East, with its Whitechapel, Hoxton, Spitalfields, Bethnal Green, and Wapping to the East India Docks. The colour of life is grey and drab. Everything is helpless, hopeless, unrelieved, and dirty. Bathtubs are a thing totally unknown, as mythical as the ambrosia of the gods. The people themselves are dirty, while any attempt of cleanliness becomes holding fast when it is not pitiful and tragic. Strange, vagrant odours come drifting along the greasy wind, and the rain, when it falls, is more like grease than water from heaven. The very cobblestones are scummed with grease. In brief, a vast and complacent dirtiness obtains which could be done away with by nothing short of a Vesuvius or Mount Pelée. Here lives a population as dull and unimaginative as its long grey miles of dingy brick. Religion has virtually passed it by, and a gross and stupid materialism reigns, fatal-like to the things of the spirit and the finer instincts of life. It used to be the proud boast that every Englishman's home was his castle. But today it is an anachronism. The ghetto folk have no homes. They do not know the significance and the sacredness of home life. Even the municipal dwellings where live the better class workers are overcrowded barracks. They have no home life. The very language proves it. The father returning from work asks his child in the street where his mother is, and back the answer comes, in the buildings. A new race has sprung up, as street people. They pass their lives at work and in the streets. They have dens and layers into which to crawl for sleeping purposes, and that is all. One cannot travesty the word by calling such dens and layers homes. The traditional silent and reserved Englishman has passed away. The pavement folk are noisy, valuable, high-strung, excitable when they are yet young. As they grow older, they become steeped and stupefied in beer. When they have nothing else to do, they ruminate as a cow ruminates. They are to be met with everywhere, standing on curbs and corners, and staring into vacancy. Watch one of them. He will stand there, motionless, for hours, and when you go away, you will leave him still staring into vacancy. It is most absorbing. He has no money for beer, and his lair is only for sleeping purpose, so what else remains for him to do? He has already solved the mysteries of girls' love and wives' love and child's love, and found them delusions and shams, vain and fleeting as dewdrops, quick vanishing before the ferocious facts of life. As I say, the young are high-strung, nervous, excitable. The middle-aged are empty-headed, stolid, and stupid. It is absurd to think for an instant that they can compete with the workers of the New World. Brutalized, degraded, and dull, the ghetto folk will be unable to render efficient service to England in the world's struggle for industrial supremacy which economist Clare has already begun. Neither as workers nor as soldiers can they come up to the mark when England, in her need, calls upon them, the forgotten ones. And if England be flung out of the world's industrial orbit, they will perish like flies at the end of summer. Or, with England critically situated and with them made desperate, as wild beasts are made desperate, they may become a menace and go swelling down to the West End to return the slumming the West End has done in the East, in which case, before rapid fire guns and the modern machinery of warfare, they will perish the more swiftly and easily.